This is not what I'm going to quote, right? You see if we know who it is. This is not the end. It is not the beginning of the end, but perhaps it is the end of the beginning. Yes, indeed. Winston Churchill. Yes, indeed. I would like to take one moment, and please, in your own way, if you like, you can join me in your own way, eyes open, eyes closed, just to give thanks. I would like to give thanks to the Umbrians, the Etruscans, who are in this place where we are standing and sitting and being now, where we are on their land. I'd like to give thanks to the trees and the animals that were here before us. I would like to give thanks to the lady of the Duomo. I would like to give thanks to the future generations who will come after us, for the permission to be here now with them. And I'd like to thank you for being here today. I know that this was almost beyond the last day, so thank you very much for your time and attention. And thank you for the opportunity to share with you a few of my reflections and a few of my thinking about some of the things we've seen over the course of this week. So in a way, I hope this is a kind of synthesis of some of the major themes. Of course, I'm not going to be able to take everything. And of course, it's going to be my own interpretation of the things I want to put emphasis on. But my interest, taking very much on Luigi's great contribution at this time, in particularly around living systems theory and living systems approaches, my interest is how can we take the things that we have seen and bring them into our practice in a kind of day-to-day way? What does it mean not just to think in terms of systems, but to see systems, to live the systems, to be the systems? What we have seen during this week is that we live in a tremendously interconnected and interdependent world. That you move one part and the other parts move. That you try to change one thing and you cannot do it by itself. So even though we see this world of great interdependence, the degrees of complexity in today's world make it very difficult to begin to address this interdependence. In different languages, there are different expressions for this kind of knot of problems, this kind of, we call it a wicked problem. That's one way of talking about it. In the system sciences and complexity, we say a wicked problem. In Spanish, it would be a galleta or a quilombo. What would it be in Italian? Something's really...
Casino.
Casino, that would work. Right, okay, so being able to address that, where do you get the handle on that? Where do you begin? That's often the question. In 1989, so we're talking about a little while ago, in a book that was called Learning Our Way Out, which is good, I like the title, Lester Milbrath said, as a society, we have to learn better how to learn. I call it social learning. It is the dynamism for change that could lead us to a new kind of society that will not destroy itself from its own excesses. For we must share a vision of a new society before we can realize it. Designing a better society and maintaining a good life require deep thought and sustained effort by all of us. Reasoning together is the only way we can bring it about. This is exactly what we're doing. So I want to just say that we are doing what Lester Milbrath asked for. And what's important for me about this is that often we're saying people need to change. The world needs to change. Governments need to change. We are the ones we have been waiting for. And to take this idea that we are the change agents, makers, catalysts, right? I think it's very important. So not to say, somebody should do something about this. Right? We are the ones we've been waiting for. However, as this week has been exploring, we don't often have a balanced engagement with the forces of progress. We often get very fascinated by our technological abilities, and we don't have a commensurate level of socio-emotional capabilities and response abilities. So I like to think in terms of sense abilities, so we can sense what is emerging. Marco, I'm not going to pronounce his last name, mainly because I can't. Marco was helping us get a sense of the power that we can engage with. And he was saying, I asked him, is he a shaman? I said, do you see yourself as a shaman? And he said, I see everyone as a shaman now. He said, we all have this ability. Right? So definitely he's a guide for this. But the sense ability is something we can cultivate. And that leads to the response ability. How do we respond? What is keeping us from this? If we have the calling that Lester Milbraith talks about, the need for the vision, we're sharing this, what is it that still keeps us from being the change? And I suggest that perhaps it is a crisis of perception. And this is something that Luigi and Fritjof Capra have also explored in great detail. What is the main crisis of our time? And they will say it's a crisis of perception. Which is interesting you put it in that way, because we could think it's a crisis of the environment, or it's a crisis of population. Or no, it's a crisis of our perception to be able to deal with that, to be able to approach it, to be able to sense it. Okay? The kind of crisis that we have often is blinded by our technological engagements with the world, our technologically mediated engagements. I think it's okay.
Oh, that sounds good.
I need this.
Anybody have that? No. Sorry. Hello? There are two people stuck on an escalator and we need help. Now, will somebody please do something? I don't believe this. You gotta be kidding me.
I'm gonna cry.
Well,
So she says, I'm going to cry. He says, well, there's nothing else left to do, is there? So, how often, though, this is silly, but how often does this happen to us? In some way or another, that we don't even recognize that we have these blinders on, and that the technology, I mean, we have these terms now in sociology. We can say that somebody is app-enabled because they can use their app to get where they're going, to determine things, or they're app-dependent. And we've become very dependent on our technologies to mediate our experience. How do we experience the world? Can we have the perceptions of what is going on? Marco has clearly different levels. He's cultivated different levels of perception. How can we have different perceptions as well? Thank you. Go. Part of this is often thought to be resolved by systems thinking. And systems thinking allows us to think in terms of relate to the world in terms of unintended consequences. We can think not only in terms of the immediate effect, like we build the Aswan Dam on the Nile River in Egypt, now we solve our electricity problem. Oh, but now we created real problems in terms of agriculture because all of the nutrients are blocked on one side of the dam. Plus it changes all of the relationship between the people who lived along the dam before, and it used to flood regularly. And so the culture has changed. The relationship with nature changes. So technological fixes often lead to secondary and tertiary problems of greater distress. What we're living now in terms of the questions of sustainability are a direct result of this kind of thinking like this. So systems thinking is often presented as a kind of panacea. It's a solution. You start to see the whole elephant, right? Because if you are, some of these people are in business, some of these people are in medicine, others are scientists. Okay, so it's a particular fragmented way, and each has a very good answer to what is in front of them. They're all blindfolded, so they don't actually see it, right? But they have good answers, because that's what the data is telling them. The direct experience of reality is telling them this is a spear, or it's a snake, or it's a tree. And the systems thinking view allows you to see the interconnectedness, and you also see the whole perspective. But it's not the answer to everything. Often systems thinking can determine expected outcomes. So sometimes you get into a situation where the technology fails. Is everybody okay over there? Yeah. Good. Where you have a situation like this. Again, another group of blind men, and they are exploring their reality, and one of them says it's an elephant. And then there's this pressure to conform to the model, that's presented to you. And so you adapt your interpretation of reality based on what is the current paradigm, the current thinking around this. It's definitely an elephant, no doubt about it, right? The concern that we have, and I think that is good that we have as well, is what is our relationship when we keep exploring reality and just trying to see what's here? Is this a wall? Is this an elephant? And we keep pushing and poking at it. Recently, they sent rockets to the moon to make an explosion on the surface of the moon to see if there was water underneath, so that we could see later if there's going to be a possibility of converting the water into hydrogen and oxygen and have a livable domes for humans to be there. We sent a rocket and made a very violent engagement with the moon. We exploded something on the surface just to see. How respectful is that? How engaged is that? So if we keep poking and pushing at reality as if it's just something, an object out there, right? We are not co-emerging with it. So what is this attitude that we have that reality is anything we can push and poke at? How do we co-emerge, co-evolve with it? So systems thinking and systems practice has been with us for quite a while. In Luigi and Capra's book, they trace very nicely its development, its history, and its impact in the world as ways of thinking and as ways of engaging with the world, seeing the whole elephant. And I would like to explore with you a little bit how we can move to systems consciousness and systems being, right? This, for me, requires a kind of relational intelligence. The guy with the same hairstyle says, the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. So again, these are attitudinal engagements, right? How are we showing up in this reality? So for me, this means yes, systems thinking. And doesn't mean rejecting, moving beyond the thinking. It does mean engaging with the data collection, the measurement, the engagements with reality that can allow us to get a better quantitative understanding, standard of living, but also quality of life, quality of being. How can we engage with systems feeling? What does that mean even? And what would systems being mean? When I took on the presidency of the International Society for the Systems Sciences, my challenge to the society was to move from being what I called consummate cartographers of reality. We could map and model and simulate all types of complex adaptive systems in a variety of different kinds of environments. But usually the mapper and the modeler and the simulator was over here, and they're modeling reality over there. They're usually not putting themselves into it. Now we have second order and third order cybernetics, and we start to say, how are we recursively part of the systems we model? But even there's a sense of modeling the feedback loops without necessarily engaging in any kind of empathetic or any kind of compassionate engagement with reality. Again, thinking about that last elephant. Thinking about the last elephant, thinking about Marco's engagement with our place here, right? How are we doing this as well? Knowledge frameworks. This comes from the work of John Heron and Peter Reason. They have written even textbooks on participatory inquiry. They put together 4 different kinds of knowing, 4 different ways of knowing. I think it reflects a little bit what we've been exploring. Experiential knowing means learning through direct experience. Words, images, or representations cannot be used to convey this level of knowing. So it's when you walk into a forest and say, this is so peaceful, this is so beautiful, I feel embraced here. There's a wonder here, there's a peace here. And you walk into another forest in another part of the world and you feel, something terrible happened here. I don't know what it is, but this feels, I don't want to go into this forest. There's something very heavy here. Again, these are the kind of things that we can sense if we listen in to our reality. It speaks to us. Putting that into words, the pirates kind of had the experience, I feel it in my bones. You know, this kind of, but it's hard to really say, how do you know that? And we often discard that knowledge because it's, how do you know that? Can you show it to me? Can you tell me more about it? I just know. We don't honor that very much in our Western world. We neither honor even the second level of knowing in our Western world very much, which is presentational knowing, learning through creative interpretation, the arts, literature, spiritual allegory, are effective vehicles for this level of knowing. So, how do you ride a bicycle? What kind of day is it today? You can write a poem about it, and that communicates. You can play music about it. Peter and the Wolf is a beautiful musical allegory, and you can get into the sense of relationship of the characters that are being narrated through the music. So there are ways of communicating at this level and giving and conveying the sense that you have of the reality. And still, it is not very much honored or legitimized as ways of knowing in our Western world. The next 2 levels are the worlds we primarily live in. Propositional knowing, learning through words, formal concepts, models and theories, readings, lectures, writings. Well, this is our current educational focus. That's what we consider to be valid and legitimate knowing. Right. And then there's the last level. Here's John Heron and Peter Reason. Practical knowing is learning through doing, participating, designing, and engaging in different types of projects that apply models, theories, and other forms of propositional knowing. So you can be studying architecture, and then you build the bridge. The building of the bridge is the practical knowing. The studying of the architecture and the different aspects of force and structure are at the level of propositional knowing. Okay, how can we be whole creatures? How can we honor these all these different ways of knowing? The macro violin. To describe his theory U, Otto Scharmer quotes, you know who this is? This is Marco's brother. Marco Pogacnik. I said it, Marco Pogacnik. His brother, I asked him. So his brother is the violinist, and cited by Otto Scharmer, and he's a famous violinist. And when he was playing in the Cathedral of Chartres, he had an experience, an insight, and I want to share the full thing with you. I felt that the cathedral almost kicked me out. You can almost hear Marco in this as well. I felt that the cathedral almost kicked me out. "Get out with you," she said. "For I was young and I tried to perform as I always did, by just playing my violin. But then I realized that in Chartres you actually cannot play your small violin, but you have to play the macro violin. The small violin is the instrument that is in your hands. The macro violin is the whole cathedral that surrounds you. The Cathedral of Chartres is built entirely according to musical principles. Playing the macro violin requires you to listen and to play from another place, from the periphery. You have to move your listening and playing from within to beyond yourself." Barbara, you can attest to this kind of thing? Yeah? Right? Right? So if you just play from here and project from here, you may not be engaging the context and the environment in meaningful ways, in meaning-making ways. So again, this is an analogy for, I believe, for the ways in which we always interact, or mostly interact in the Western world, with the things we want to communicate, the things we do, the things we build. And it makes us out of tune with a lot of aspects of reality, right? So how do we continuously play the macro violin? For me, this is moving from systems thinking to systems being. This is one example, a very good example for me, of this kind of change. And I'm sure you can hear echoes of the presentations on phenomenology as well in this frame. Right? How do you change how you observe what you are observing, right? And shifting your point of observation. The question then is, how do we take this into the world, right? And often we are challenged to do so because we are in positions where we are expected to be able to find the direction and be leaders. You can't see the poor dog. Everyone is counting on the dog. You can see they're all following. Come on. And the dog says, "I can't smell a damn thing." You know, that happens, right? So you don't have your sense of where you are going, but you're in a role and the expectation is to move with that. How do you regain that sense? How do you tune in? How do you find your path? I think this is not just a question individually, this is a question for humanity at this point. Right? So how do we do this individually and collectively? Okay. To do this, I want to do a quick review of what I heard as well during this week in terms of the forces in the cathedral, the forces that are shaping humanity's, what the Club of Rome likes to talk about, the problematique, the set of interrelated problems that challenge humanity at this point in time. What do we have? Well, we are living in a world where there's 24/7, means 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, operations of companies, businesses, right? So a project starts in, usually, just saying, in Argentina, because, you know, starts there, and then it moves to India and gets developed over there, and then it moves to Australia, and then it moves back to Argentina. So the team in Argentina can develop it the next day. It never sleeps, but it passes to teams around the world, for example. 24/7 call centers, you have experienced this. So this is a modality of operation which humans individually rest, but organizations start to be never sleeping. A kind of immortality, a kind of eternity, in the present at least. This is fed by, and it feeds, you have a feedback loop right here, the globalization of technologies. Information processing and communications technologies permit and foster and encourage the globalization of markets. But the things that we have been seeing here, genetics, nanotechnology, robotics, not just big data, but smart data, that comes to us in the middle of presentations as well. Yes, he was a plant. I asked him to. With the Internet of Things, right? With the IoT, the Internet of Things, the deep AI, which is connected, virtual reality, artificial reality, sorry, virtual reality, augmented reality. AR is augmented reality. You know, it's like Pokemon Go. I play it, okay. Then AE is artificial empathy, what we got here. Right, that we had the presentation as well, right, on artificial empathy. So how that is being also explored in our efforts to mediate and augment our engagement with reality. So the thing here is that these technologies individually are tremendously disruptive. And by the way, when we talk about disruptive technologies, we're not talking about the technology creating a problem in the world. What they're disrupting is our behavior. Right? They're disrupting our modes of acting and having us relate to each other, to our environment, to things, to ourselves in different ways. That's the core of the disruption. But when these are combined, it's the stuff of science fiction, and we're doing that. We have now nano doctors, which you can, at least they're exploring this. I don't know, I hope it's not out yet, but they have nano doctors in the sense that you can program these nanobots, so you're combining nanotechnology and robotics, right? So that they can go into your bloodstream and they can make repairs, genetics, at the level of the genes, right? Or at least of the chromosomes, right? So you're combining these things. Right? So the questions here then, aside from all the questions of ethics, is remember the guy pushing the block over and coming back and knocking over. So we don't know what effect that will have. Right? We say, well, we're fixing this problem. But again, the Aswan Dam, what other problems are we creating? The Aswan Dam is a simple example. It's not this level of intervention. Right? So it's thinking about these things, feeling about these things, sensing about these things. What else is going on? Environmental pressures. One thing that I won't forget is the presentation of, what was her name? I forgot her name. What? Say it, Tess, yesterday, right? Right? That call, that request that she said, that she made, right? To think about what is the impact that we have in the world. She is asking us, right? So I do think really that there's a knowing there. Of course, she is in a particular context with her family, particular family, but still, what is it that we have to learn, right? So we have these increasing interdependencies, interconnections. That first slide that I put had everything connected, right? And we are not only reaching, but we have crossed many of the threshold limits of sustainability on the planet. And sustainability is simply defined as the capacity the ability to live within the carrying capacity of your environment. And now we have exceeded that, right, along several metrics. And things that go off the page, geopolitical and socioeconomic challenges. And all of these changes means that we have a fundamentally new world of relations, right? Relations with the environment, which create then relations among ourselves and impacts in terms of migrations, in terms of we're living in the coastal areas of the world, et cetera, right? In terms of what's going on now in India, what's going on now across the US and in Africa, in terms of heat and in terms of floods, more extreme levels of weather that affect us also geopolitically. By the way, you know that for the last 65 million years, the privileged species has been mammals. Not species. The privileged order has been mammals. We've been within a particular range of temperature, particular types of levels of ultraviolet rays reaching the surface, and so on. And now that's shifting because we're having attenuated ozone levels, although they are coming back. We're still not sure how we are affecting them. We're having increased temperatures, more intense storms, more frequent mega storms, mixing, more ultraviolet radiation reaching the surface. We're losing the favored order status that mammals have had. And you know what's replacing, what's coming into more favored status for this?
Jellyfish.
Viruses and bacteria.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Virus and bacteria. Yeah, sure, I think cockroaches and grasses are going to do okay too. But viruses and bacteria thrive with this kind of intense storms, more storms, and more of that higher temperatures. That's what I want to say. All right, let's move on. What are the implications? So, increasing interdependencies among social, technological, and environmental systems. Okay, just so kind of summing up what we were just looking at. And increased power of business to shape our world. And it's not just business in a formal sense, but all activities of human intervention, right? So this can change the world for the better, and that's important to recognize. It can, right? Here's this dude again, and he says, the unleashed power of the atom has changed everything, save our modes of thinking, and thus we drift towards unparalleled catastrophes. Right? This is back then, when he was concerned about the type of technological change that regarded insight into the use of the atom. And it can also change it for the worse. So then the question is, if this is not a matter of technological determinism, where we just say it's happening to us and we're the victims of the changes of the technology, and we say, well, and I do believe that this expression from one of my mentors, Thomas Park Hughes, who said, the most succinct definition I've heard of technology, technology is crystallized culture. It embodies and embeds the instrumental values of those who innovate it, right? So we are the expressions of our technology, and it continues to evolve. It's not crystallized in the sense, but the technology itself, the physical, and it's not just physical, but the roles and relations that we engage with can be crystallized in that way. So what's the challenge? We can think that the more powerful the technology, the more serious the secondary and unintended consequences. Okay, it's a conclusion I'm drawing. So if our thinking hasn't changed, but our technology has, where are we drifting? Right? This is the kind of thing we consider here in this Todi week of Cortona, France. This guy's all over the place, and he's always looks the same. Have you noticed? He says, our technology has clearly surpassed our humanity. That's something that we still are not addressing. What does that mean? Our technology has clearly surpassed our humanity. Right? In the 1954 Bertrand Russell and Albert Einstein manifesto, the Pugwash Manifesto in Pugwash, Nova Scotia, they ended their conference of science with a plea to scientists in the world. Their last sentence was, remember your humanity and forget the rest. This is to a science, the World Science Convention. Okay, so how do we work with this, especially in these kind of pressures that we're working with? So crisis in Chinese, two characters make that word. Danger and opportunity. I'm sure you know this. We're talking to a group who knows all this. But the important thing for me is to notice that in any situation where we can think this is a crisis, and now we're no longer talking about climate change. The popular way of expressing it now is shifting to climate crisis, which is a recognition of the fact that this isn't just something interesting to study, but as Greta says, the house is on fire. Right? So climate crisis, but there's the opportunity in this. It's not fatalistic, right? What can we do about this? And just a quick show of hands, VUCA. How many are familiar with the term, so I know how far to go in? You know what VUCA is. Okay, wow, okay, good, good, good. So let's go into this. For me, this is a critical term for us, in particular, to know about. It stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And this combination of systems that we find ourselves in, dynamic systems, our environments, but also internally. You heard the presentations here that talked about the levels of pollutants in our own body, in our liver, in mother's milk. It's amazing how many non-natural chemicals are found. Synthetic is a better way of putting it. Synthetic chemicals are found in our body these days. So these environments are not only external but internal, and when they are volatile, uncertain, so they're each different. They mean different things. Something that is volatile is something that is radically explosive. Right? At any moment, it could disrupt. That's volatile. Uncertain is you're not sure when you're not sure in which direction it will go. You're not sure what kind of explosion it would be. Complex, not the same as complicated, has many levels of being, let's just put it that way. Many levels of being that make up what it is, right? And ambiguous is, what messages is it giving you about what it is, what it's doing, how it operates? If it's ambiguous, it's unclear how to interpret what this system is emerging into. When we have increased environments like this, and we do in today's day and age because of the rapidity of information exchange and because of the four megatrends that I mentioned earlier, we have to learn how to engage with this. But the learning cannot come from rational individual response. That's weird. I'm convinced it can't. It has to come from collective intelligence, one. And it can't come from a monodisciplinary framework. You can only respond to VUCA environments from a transdisciplinary framework. I would say more than a multidisciplinary, because you have to integrate. Multidisciplinary is just several disciplines added, but the transdisciplinary integrates the understanding into a new understanding. Right? So that's what the systems view seeks to do. But I also want to emphasize, this comes from the work of Robert Johansen, that our role, I believe, is not just to deal with the problems, but also to use the alchemy that we can to transmute them into opportunities. So we don't only see the crises, but we see the opportunities as well. Johansen talks about vision, understanding, clarity, and agility as a different or reframing, different way of understanding VUCA environments. So, but for me, this is very, very key. Thinking in terms of VUCA world puts us into a framework which is very different from that which we were dealing with certainly more than 50 years ago, but even 10 years ago. The rapidity of, and the interdependence, the levels of interdependence that we have now. So part of what I want to do here is talk about what can we do, what kind of learning, what kind of disciplines, what kind of approaches can help us address these changes. So I suggest the following 6. System thinking, but bearing in mind, when I use this code word, as Luigi uses and Fritjof Capra use, it's not just thinking from here, but it's thinking from here. We know the neurons of the heart, the neurons of the gut, but it's a different kind of thinking. This is not the linear rational thinking. This is the empathetic thinking of the heart and the intuitive thinking of the gut. How can we bring those into play in our meaning making? Those 4 levels of knowing, how can we engage the first 2 as well? Right? Collective intelligence. Well, for the VUCA world, it's a requisite. But there's a precursor to collective intelligence, and that's connective intelligence. Knowing what to connect with whom to connect, what kind of systems would create the effective synergy, which when you put them into play leads to collective intelligence. If you don't have the right connection in your system, you can actually get groupthink instead of collective intelligence. And groupthink is where the highest level of intelligence or of ability to respond of the social system expresses the lowest common denominator of intelligence of the group. And that's usually groupthink when there is fear or no trust, when the context is such that the people simply go along with what's said because saying anything different is risky. But when there is trust and love and a sense of we can do this together, and this is why I think Greta is, for example, Greta Thunberg, is that her? How do you pronounce her last name? Thunberg, is having such an impact, right? We listen to her and there's an affective relation as well with her. So, because she's, Jane Goodall and many others are saying the same things as well. So how do we connect, right? So there's a collective intelligence, connective intelligence, collective intelligence for collective creativity and collective wisdom, because that's where we're going. Don't want to just prove how intelligent we are. We want to be able to respond effectively and affectively. Empathetic learning. So this is, and for me, it's not just empathy with other human beings. And Marco was bringing this in beautifully. It's about dealing with the elephant, dealing with the moon. So we're not sending rockets to explode the surface because we want to see what's going on underneath it. There must be other ways of doing that. There must be other ways of testing for new cosmetics instead of putting things into the eyes of rabbits. Okay, so that's already being handled in most countries, right? We don't deal with rabbits to see if this is going to be hyperallergenic or not. But we still do that in many other ways with not honoring the sacredness of our relationships, right? Okay, so empathetic learning, empathetic with our world around us. Design thinking. So I just ask, how many people know the television series MacGyver? Okay, some. Anyways, about this guy who is able to get in weird situations and always find his way out, because this is not this, but it's not in a Magritte kind of way. He's able to actually take this and use it for something else, right? It's not a pen, it's a lightsaber. No, it's not that extreme, but he's able to get out of his situations. A paperclip becomes an incredibly useful instrument because he has the design thinking way of engaging with the world, of not being just on the escalator and saying, oh, it's just an escalator, it takes me up and I can't move. Because that's what the technology does. So he's able to work with technologies and his environment in creative ways. Design thinking. Biomimicry. Okay, just another, just to get a sense. Biomimicry, how many people are into that? Cool, okay. Very powerful way of engaging with the world. It says, nature is our mentor. Because nature has been around nature has been around, that's a weird way of expressing it. So life on this planet has been around for 3.8 billion years. And if we look at the Anthropocene, that's only 11,000 years, right? So 11,000 compared to 3.8 billion of responding to challenges and resolving the challenges, huge crises. Life had to respond to a challenge in which the entire planet became toxic. Oxygen was toxic. And it had to be able to respond to that effectively. And it did. And we are up to this task of responding to our current challenges because life has prepared us for this for 3.8 billion years, right? So learning how does nature resolve complex problems, VUCA problems, that's biomimicry. It's the full study of it, right? And applying that to analogous human challenges. And then experimental prototyping. So experimental prototyping means don't wait until you got it all right and figured out. Try it out. See how it works. And then go back and bring it back in and work on it some more. Right? So I still have another 25 minutes.
No.
Yes, I do, because that's where I started. I had 1 hour.
You have 45 minutes and now you've been talking 60, but...
No, seriously. I have been talking for 40 minutes.
I apologize.
That's all right. I've been talking for 40 minutes and I was guaranteed 1 hour.
Yeah, but 1 hour is concurrent question.
Okay. Good. I'll move ahead. Here's a question. How can we move from our frameworks which explore responses to VUCA worlds based on mentalities, on rigid thinking, on ways of addressing volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous change? Some of it's very reactive. When we have processes that resist because we're in a fragile frame of engagement, our companies, our communities, our frames of engagement, trying to move towards the anti-fragile frame, right? Where it's beyond agile, which can quickly adapt to change. The anti-fragile is in a way or an orientation that it thrives on change. It doesn't look for chaos and complexity, but it says, wow, what opportunities we have now, right? So it's that kind of engagement with change. So let's just look at how we understand what is our work, just from the world of business. Business, what a weird word. It just means being busy. And in Spanish, it's even worse. Negocio means not ocio. Not ocio is leisure. Neg, ocio, not being in leisure. Right? Negocio. So it's not a very good role to say, this is what I am. I'm a business person. Right? I'm not involved in leisure, I'm just being busy. The Swedes, and my mother is I have a Swedish heritage, so I even know how to pronounce that, näringsliv. Nourishment for life. Imagine if that was our identity. Nourishment for life. Right? It means that we are on a path that is future creating, life affirming, and opportunity increasing. Somebody once asked me, what's the difference between learning and evolution? It's a good question. My response was that evolution is the way the universe learns. And learning is the way humans evolve. But this is the dance. And this means in order to evolve and be part of an ongoing narrative on this planet, we need to have the learning society that Lester Milbreth talked about. Right? Because this planet will continue to evolve with or without us. Life is not at risk. Some life, some specific forms of life are. But the issue of life isn't. Right? But if we want to be part of the ongoing narrative, then we have a learning path to engage with. And this also means moving our understanding of what it is our task is about. It's not just about survival, although that is important. And it's not just about being sustainable on this planet, although that is important. These are necessary but not sufficient. Being resilient is tremendously important. But the idea of being thrivable, this is where anti-fragile comes into play as an attitude. And this is where we engage with reality, with life, out of joy, awe, and wonder. And our relationship becomes truly empathetic, and we become part of a sacred process of emergence. Right? So here's my suggestion. That part of the objective is to create these evolutionary learning communities that discover and innovate interdependent sets of solutions to VUCA challenges for a just, healthy, and thrivable planet. Right? And it seems to me that this is what we are all coming here to do. The 5 practices, and here I'm ending very soon. 5 practices, this is how do we bring it into our personal practices, but not only personal individual, personal collective. Right? So this is what I seek to practice. So moving from the theoretical into the embodied, at the intrapersonal level, means you, yourself, you with yourself. This is conviviality, this is individual thrivability. Are you getting enough sleep? Okay, aside from yesterday, right? I mean, in general, right? Are you eating healthy, all those kind of things. It's individual, personal, intrapersonal thrivability, not just sustainability. At the interpersonal level, this is conviviality with others. Right? The collective thrivability. How are we engaging in non-dysfunctional relations? Not sabotage, intrigue. Right? How do we do that? How do we create healthy communities? At the trans-species level, so we've gone from personal self to collective human self, and now to the more than human world. Conviviality with nature. Ecosystemic thrivability. How are we part of a narrative that contributes to the thrivability in nature? I sat with a beekeeper once who said that in any ecosystem where the bees are present, he loved bees, he was in his 70s and still a beekeeper, all the animals and plants know what the bees do and depend on the bees for doing that. And I asked, in any ecosystem where human beings are present, what do all the animals know that we do and depend on us to do it? So this is coming up with a good answer to that is beyond, our parasitic engagement, is at this level of exploration. At the transgenerational level is conviviality with ancestors and future generations. But it is with ancestors, part of the narrative. What is it that our parents' set in motion, and how are we honoring that narrative? How are we part of a coherent story of emergence? Right? And what is it that we are preparing as a narrative for future generations that honors their being on this planet? Right? And then there's the pan-cosmic level, because our planet is just part of a very much bigger story. This is conviviality with the deep dimensions of the cosmos. And I don't mean time and space necessarily, but this is the context, the fields. This is where spiritual thrivability comes in for me. And it takes us out of not only a homocentric, but a Gaia-centric frame. So, just to review, there's personal balance. There is communal balance. There is environmental balance, balance with ancestors and future generations, and spiritual balance. The quest best for our species, I believe, is not just the thrivability at each of these levels, but it's the thrivability at all of these levels. So it's important to seek to engage, not to equal extent in any situation, but at least to see that our engagement with the world incorporates these expressions or these orientations in some way, all together, right? So you're looking at the thrivability of the interrelation among these ways of being. And so this is the last heavy slide. How do we engage with the future? There are, I'm going to suggest 4 ways. One way is through modeling utopias. And we envision a world that we really want. It's usually idealistic and sometimes overly optimistic. If it's not truly an ideal, it's not a utopia, right? But these future scenarios often cannot be implemented, and that makes them very frustrating because we can't be on the Star Trek Enterprise or whatever, right? Not now. It would be a ways off. Alternatively, we look at dystopias. And these are reactive because they say this is the kind of world we don't want. And Hollywood is full of this, from the Mad Max movies to you name it. It's pretty well the kind of future we don't want. If you've seen Minority Report with Tom Cruise from a while ago, they actually hired scientists and technologists and had a meeting in Europe to project what kind of technology could be likely in 20, 30 years. So the police activities, the way the police came out of their vehicles, and the kind of robots that they used were actual extrapolations of our current technological potential, but in a dystopia frame. That wasn't the vision of a nice future. The alternative to these two is often just a myopia, which is more of the same. It's like trying to build bigger, faster, stronger caterpillars. Not seeing the potential of the butterfly. Not even saying, you know, maybe we have to go through a period where there are the imaginal cells in the cocoon, and there's an actual destructive process as the old system breaks down its structures to allow for a new system to emerge. Indeed, this may be what is happening as a narrative. We can go with that, right? But that means not just trying to make bigger, faster, stronger caterpillars. What can we do? The protopia, come on, are realistically optimistic scenarios based on creating a realistic image of the future and solutions that change the current situation and which can be realized now or in the near future. We know how to live healthy lives at the interpersonal level. We know how not to kill each other. We know how to be nice at the interpersonal level. We know how to live with nature without burning it, destroying it. We know that. We know how to live in ways that honor future generations and that do honor to our ancestors. We know all these things. And we know how to live with awe and respect for human dignity and for the sacredness of being. So how do we human this into our being? How do we make the protopia now where we actually do these things? Okay, so here's the question. What kind of global ecosystem, local is globally informed, locally relevant, right? So I'm finishing up. Be the systems you want to see in the world. You see I'm being the poster child here for that. An artist one time told me about this because it says be you in the world, right? So be you in the world. This takes off on Gandhi's expression, be the change you wish to see in the world. But I would like to bring this to be the systems, right? Systems being. But it also says here the systems want to see. There's the empathetic component. What is seeking to emerge? And if you don't remember anything, this is the last one, just remember the message of the wombat. If you don't remember anything from my presentation, it's just this.
Yo, listen up. This is your home. It's the only one you got. This place is pretty, but you can't live there. You can't even get there. So I repeat, this is your home. It's the only one you got. Cherish it, protect it. It's the only one you're gonna get. These guys, they're neighbors. They ain't going away. They ain't leaving. You have to get along with them. So you have to learn to share. You have to get along. You have to learn to get along. Because they are your neighbors. They're not going away. Okay, all this stuff, the animals, the waters, the sky, the ground, the bugs, the fish, the tacos, the people, they're all connected. Everything is connected. They all depend on one another. If you ignore that, you're only one, just one. So give it and give it. Remember, all is one, okay? Held it.
We have time, I guess, for a couple of questions. So, yeah, that's... I'm feeling grateful, inspired, and uplifted. And I have a question for you. It seems to me that there are two important areas for transforming our relationship to them. And I would like to hear comments on that. One is to death and dying. To death and dying.
Death and dying.
As part of our human experience and of our life. The other is our relationship to money as we're using it. As both can keep us locked in our own ways. What are your thoughts on including that in the picture?
Death and dying, our relationship to death and dying, and our relationship to money. Okay, I don't necessarily, interesting to have that in one question. But for me, the 5 different levels are a kind of a guide, a litmus for me to say, so how do I relate at the interpersonal, trans-species, transgenerational, and pan-cosmic levels to this issue? What is the way that brings me into being human in this process? So death and dying, how is that a celebration of life? How is that part of the narrative of being and becoming? How are we related to that? And the same question can be brought to the question of our relationship with money. It is an instrument. One of my professors, Russell Akoff, said that money is to an organization as oxygen is to the human being. Right? So we need oxygen to function and to survive. In our current society, and it doesn't need to necessarily be this way, but money allows it to function. But the pure quest for money would be like the quest for oxygen. And life is more than just searching for oxygen. Right? So just trying to grow and have more oxygen, you're missing out on the potential of what you could be doing, being, co-creating. So at least in relation to money there. And I think there are many people much more, we all are able to think about life as the journey, life as part of a narrative, life as an ongoing dance, and dying as well. Because it's part of what gives life meaning. Again, there are many stories about if you were immortal, you might not have the same levels of, I would like to engage, you could be stepping back in certain ways. So it does create a kind of impulse or incentive. As Mary Oliver once said, what are you going to do with your one wild and crazy life? You know, but it may not just be one, but the point is, what are you going to do with this one?
Your talk just, I was listening, and it brought up just some similarities with a concept called arcology. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. He was an Italian architect, probably one of the most visionary architects as far as city planning, called Paolo Soleri.
Oh yeah, yes. Arcosanti.
Yeah, Arcosanti. But so I was wondering if you had any, because as far as thinking about systems, and he had very much this idea of not creating a utopia, but a protopia, where his city designs, he didn't claim that this was it. It was something that would grow. But basically his idea was to make our cities 3-dimensional, so that the rest of nature surrounding it would be, we could access it easily, it would be protected, and at the same time we would increase our interconnectedness by making our cities 3-dimensional. So,
all I can say is we need more of that. right? And it's not just along those ways of creating livable communal place, but new educational systems, drawing on what is coming from this encounter between science and spirituality, right? Where we're starting to see now an affirmation of the spiritual wisdom from many traditions that discuss our interconnectedness, our true oneness. And we've seen that through physics as well at this time. We heard the presentation from Federico and from others. This is at the level of truly vibrational coherence. So when we see that expression in, like Arcosanti, so these are architected, communal, living, not just spaces, but a whole culture in that frame. What other dimensions can we bring this into in our relationships? So this, for me, again, comes back to those 5 levels. How are we doing that at our own level? How are we doing that with others, where Arcosanti is more at the human and nature interface? But then there are all these other levels as well. These are we need more of that throughout society. That's the learning society. Next.
It was very interesting, and I think that everybody here has the same hope and the same ideas, and it was very beautiful. But I think that the real problem is that we are 8 billion people concerned about the health of the ecosystems, the health of the children and so on, and we have 10,000 psychopaths in the world that have the power. How can we network to make this struggle against these 10,000 psychopaths? Because this is a great problem. Don't you think that we must struggle? I think that we must network in some way together and find a way to convince 7 billion people to find a way to contrast this psychopath. This is a great problem. Yes.
This is the challenge of our time. And this is a challenge that leads us through the stages from survival and viability on this planet to thrival, hopefully. We cannot do it alone. VUCA challenges like this, they talk about 12 years. They've always talked about short time horizons. Now they're talking about 12 years to be able to address this type of challenge. This need for being able to do this together is critical. If any of us think that we will do it by ourselves, that's a fool's errand. How do we engage with the collective intelligence? But that means forming the evolutionary learning ecosystems. And that's what one of the slides I had was, how do we create these evolutionary learning ecosystems? It's connecting and synergizing, using connective intelligence, and collective creativity. Right? And that means first finding the synchronicities among us, being open to that. Open. Where is it that we can dance together? That's a question of synchronicity and openness to see what's emerging. Then trying to foster the syntony. And syntony is dynamic harmony. It's that form of being able to say, not just we're in resonance, but in consonance. Consonance is where we can say, here we are consciously aligning in our ways of being and what we're seeking to do. And then from synchronicity and syntony, you can get to synergy. And I think that the synergy is the actions that we can do together to address this and to shift from crisis to opportunity. Right? So, is there a blueprint for how to do this? Do we know specifically? No. But it's about the elephant again. How are we relating to this collectively? How are we addressing VUCA challenges? And this is a challenge of our species at this time.